Muammar Qaddafi is at it again, shaking his fist at world peace and world opinion, daring anyone, particularly the United States, to move against him. Long accused by Washington of plotting and abetting terrorism, Qaddafi, the strong man of Libya, is now accused of harboring and financing the Palestinian terrorist group of Abu Nidal, the group believed to be responsible for the Rome and Vienna airport massacres. And Americans are angry. Angry enough in Maine to wrap up their kitchen garbage and mail it to Qaddafi. Angry enough here in Washington to get the fleet moving while pondering whether to actually use it against Qaddafi. What will Washington do? And Jerusalem, and London, and Paris, and Rome? John McCarthy, our national security correspondent, surveys the options.
In Libya today, anti-American demonstrations in the streets of Tripoli, or so Western news people were told. They were not allowed to witness a supposedly spontaneous event, only to see pictures of it on Libyan television. Out in the field, U.S. intelligence sources say the Libyan military has been at a high state of alert for the last 2 days. Pilots in their cockpits, patrol boats at sea monitoring Libyan waters. At the Libyan air base near the city of Sirte, technicians work round the clock to get Libya's new long-range anti-aircraft missiles, SAM-5s, ready for action. Missiles that could threaten American P-3 and RC-135 reconnaissance planes that patrol Libya's coast over international waters. And 2 days ago, there was Muammar Qaddafi himself, denying that he had anything to do with the airport massacres in Rome and Vienna, and making some threats of his own.
If there is an aggression on Libya, it will be considered the beginning of the end.
He threatened violence to Americans in their own streets if the U.S. attempted military moves against terrorists that the Reagan administration says are harbored in Libya.
We have always retained the right to respond to terrorist acts in an appropriate, measured, focused way, and other victimized states have a similar right. The military option is one that we have always retained.
Today, the aircraft carrier Coral Sea left port in Naples, Italy, and headed for the central Mediterranean. U.S. officials say it will stay there until the White House decides what to do. In Norfolk today, thousands of Navy crewmen are told to ready their ships for sea. The aircraft carrier America, the battleship Iowa, and half a dozen escorts. No steaming orders yet, but military sources say the ships are bound for the Mediterranean.
I'm not aware that we're doing anything out of the ordinary at all. We have various maneuvers and practices there, and we're carrying on as normal.
But no special U.S. buildup, sir?
No. You've got to stop listening to Qaddafi.
Despite the president's deflection, military sources say they have been hard at work on contingency planning for a week. Plans that range from strikes off aircraft carriers to FB-111 precision bombing runs from bases in Europe. As yet, no decision to strike has been made, but the options are open.
January 7, 1986. President Reagan announces an end to virtually all economic activity between the United States and Muammar Qaddafi's Libya, calling the Rome and Vienna attacks outrageous actions by an outlaw regime. At his press conference, President Reagan is asked about the possibility of Libyan terrorist reprisals.
Mr. President, how seriously do you take the threat of Mr. Qaddafi that if there is some indication of Israeli or American military retaliation, that Washington, D.C. will become a target for hit squads?
Well, I wish he was planning to do that himself. I'd be happy to welcome him. But no, how can you not take seriously a man that has proven that he is as irrational as he is on things of this kind? I find he's not only a barbarian, but he's flaky.
January 24th, 1986. The United States begins military exercises in the Mediterranean Sea near Libya.
Good evening, everyone. On the second day of U.S. naval maneuvers off the coast of Libya, Libyan leader Muammar Qaddafi is trying to show he's not intimidated. Qaddafi boarded a Libyan missile boat today and sailed into the Gulf of Sidra, an area he says is off limits to the United States. The details now from Hal Walker.
It was Colonel Qaddafi's turn once again to hurl the charge of terrorism against the United States. The Libyan leader staged a news conference for a score of journalists brought to him on board one of his Navy's missile patrol boats. Qaddafi denounced the current U.S. Navy maneuvers taking place in the Mediterranean off the Libyan coast and called on fellow Arab nations to join in resisting what he termed American aggression.
That America is staging organized terrorists against the peaceful Libyan Arab people.
Then, to the cheers of his followers on shore, the leader sailed off toward the Gulf of Sidra. This is the 150,000 square mile body of water which Qaddafi claims as Libya's. It stretches to the continental shelf of Malta and Italy. There, he said, he would draw a line of death. And we will fight, he said, with our backs to the wall. His route would take him dangerously close to the American Navy maneuver zone. Libyan television tonight highlighted the colonel's voyage, which seemed designed as much for domestic consumption as for sending a message abroad. Neither side seems intent on a real confrontation in this war of nerves, but with the U.S. and Libyan forces so near each other, the danger of conflict by misadventure remains high. Hal Walker, ABC News, Tripoli.
American military maneuvers off the coast of Libya. The Libyans attack, the United States strikes back.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. It's been a long time in the making, and it finally happened. The United States and Libya have been shooting at each other. No Americans have been hurt. No American plane or ship has been damaged. The Libyans have not been so fortunate. The fighting began today in the Gulf of Sidra off the Libyan coast. By the end of today, the United States had attacked the Libyan mainland. We begin at the Pentagon with ABC's Steve Shepard.
Carrier-based U.S. Navy fighters came under fire this morning from two long-range SA-5 Soviet-built missiles based at Sirte on the central Libyan coast. They both missed by a distance of miles. Shortly thereafter, two Libyan MiG-25s were intercepted by U.S. fighters as the MiGs approached the U.S. fleet. They were driven off without a shot being fired. That was followed by another launch of two SA-5s from Sirte, which again missed. That was enough hostile fire for U.S. forces, and a counterstrike was ordered. An A-7 attack aircraft off the USS Saratoga fired two high-speed anti-radiation missiles. The missiles, designed to home in on enemy radar, destroyed the radar units controlling the SA-5s in Sirte, effectively eliminating 12 missile batteries. There are no reports about casualties at the missile site. There is some concern about possible Soviet losses. Russians were not believed to be operating the missiles, but have been in the area conducting training. At about the same time as the attack on Sirte, an A-6 attack plane off the USS America fired two Harpoon anti-ship missiles at a Libyan fast attack missile patrol boat. The boat was hit, caught fire, and was last seen sinking. There were no apparent survivors. Another missile boat, this one operating out of Benghazi, was also attacked and damaged, but just how seriously has not been determined. There were no U.S. losses of any kind in today's action. In Washington late this afternoon, Secretary of Defense Weinberger strongly defended U.S. actions.
We were fired on and hostile acts committed by very lethal missiles while we were in international waters by Libyan forces, and we have responded.
At the time of today's operation, U.S. ships and planes were operating south of what Libyan leader Muammar Qaddafi calls his line of death, a boundary enclosing the Gulf of Sidra. Qaddafi claims the Gulf is Libyan territory and has promised to defend it. The U.S. and most other countries say the Gulf is international water and that everyone has a right to sail there. 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time last night. The USS Yorktown, a powerful Aegis anti-aircraft cruiser, has been tracking a Libyan patrol boat on its computerized radar. The boat, a French-built combatant like this one, carries sophisticated anti-ship missiles. It has been operating well north of Colonel Qaddafi's line of death, outside the disputed Gulf of Sidra, and is headed toward the U.S. fleet. The Yorktown fires two Harpoon missiles and the Libyan vessel is destroyed. There is no sign of the crew, which normally numbers about 27 men. 6:54 p.m. Two A-7 attack planes fire HARM missiles at the same Libyan SA-5 missile site near Sirte, attacked by U.S. forces earlier in the day. While no Libyan missiles have been fired since early afternoon, the attack is ordered to knock out a tracking radar that had apparently been repaired following the earlier U.S. raid. The SA-5 batteries are again taken out of action. 1:07 this morning. Two A-6 attack planes fire missiles at a Libyan-owned, Russian-built Nanuchka missile patrol boat.
Once again, U.S. planes are successful. The Nanuchka is last seen dead in the water and blazing. Despite such combat, Defense Secretary Weinberger made it clear today that the U.S. is not in any haste to leave the area.
Our activity is continuing. The exercises above and below and around the 32-30 line.
Good evening. Now that the military action in the Gulf of Sidra off the coast of Libya is over, Colonel Qaddafi has declared victory. Well, it shouldn't be a surprise that if you'd been in Libya today and you hadn't heard any other version of events, you might have thought that Libya had taken on the United States and won. ABC's Charles Glass is in Tripoli.
Colonel Qaddafi walked onto the balcony in front of his military headquarters like a conquering hero. He raised his hand and the crowd, mostly members of his armed forces, cheered what they saw as Gaddafi's moment of triumph. He used today, the anniversary of the 1970 closing of British military bases here, to give his version of the week's events. He said the American fleet ended its maneuvers 2 days ahead of schedule because of Libyan military pressure. He said no American warships crossed his so-called line of death into the Gulf of Sidra. He claimed Libya shot down 3 American F-14 warplanes, saying Libya had allowed the planes into Libyan airspace in order to ambush them. He said 6 American pilots were now being eaten by fish in the Gulf of Sidra. But he contradicted himself, saying the Libyan Navy permitted American helicopters to rescue the U.S. casualties, but he added the U.S. fleet did not permit Libyan ships to rescue Libyan sailors, admitting for the first time the U.S. had hit a Libyan naval vessel. He told the crowd that 2 American missiles were fired near the town of Sirte on Monday, but claimed one exploded without causing damage and the other didn't explode at all. He said he would give the unexploded missile to the Soviet Union for examination. Then some men led a cow into the crowd, and without warning, the defenseless animal was slaughtered. On its hide was written the name Reagan. The American and Libyan versions of the last week's events differ sharply, but there can be no doubt that Colonel Gaddafi's account is believed here just as much as President Reagan's is in the United States. Charles Glass, ABC News in Tripoli, Libya.